You have a story. Very good story. You want to hear it? There he is. A dumb kid wondering what the future held. He wanted to be a writer, but the words just wouldn't come.
Maybe.
And then, all of a sudden, there she was. For the first time, he saw a world that was bigger than the one he'd been born into.
Finished.
That was his moment.
No. Tell me the truth. What really happened?
It's so different from anything you've ever done before.
You steal man's life and expect there be no price to pay.
Clay Hammond is a popular writer who has recently released a new book titled The Words. He appeared before an audience, reading the first chapter, in which an old man standing in the rain watched Rory Jansen and his wife Dora walk to a limousine. The old man returned to his modest apartment, while Rory and Dora enjoyed their new life. In the past, Rory was an unsuccessful writer, but his latest book became a bestseller and brought him fame. Critics have highly praised his novel Tears on the Window. Rory received a very prestigious literary art award, while the old man, having bought his book, felt bitterness. Rory addressed the audience, saying that he only wanted to write a truthful story of a man, his wife, and their child. Now Rory Jansen basks in the glory and has everything he could ever dream of. But somewhere waited the old man who could change everything. Clay Hammond continued to read the chapter from his book, stating that 5 years before the main events of the novel, Rory moved to Brooklyn with his girlfriend Dora after graduating from college. They lived in a room on the first floor of an old factory. Even then, Rory knew what his life should become. The young people loved each other very much and believed in their happy future. At night Rory wrote, hoping his voice would one day be heard. Dora believed in her husband and supported him in everything. The only thing that clouded their marital life was the lack of money. Rory had no choice but to ask his father for money once again. The day before, Rory had given his book to a literary agent, and perhaps this time, it would finally be published. Mr. Jansen, who has his own small business, was tired of the son not working anywhere and advised him to consider writing as a hobby for now. However, Rory is not going to give up on his dream, no matter what. Sure, the father reluctantly agreed to help him and wrote a check, but said it was the last time. If Rory wants to be a man, he must find a steady job and learn responsibility. At night, Rory continued to write, sending his novel to all the publishers. But all he received were rejections, indifference, or just silence. A girl named Daniela quietly entered the auditorium to listen to Clay Hammond, who continued reading. Eventually, Rory was forced to find a steady job. He got a position at one of the largest publishing houses in New York, hoping to make the necessary connections. His colleague, a science fiction writer, also dreams of worldwide fame. Rory and Dora's life became routine. One day on a Friday, they got married and spent their honeymoon in Paris. When they entered an antique shop, Rory was drawn to an old briefcase, which he decided to buy. Their honeymoon ended, and the couple returned to New York. Then, without any warning, Rory received the call he had long awaited. This agent had impeccable taste and was searching for new literary talents. The agent expressed admiration for Rory's style, but alas, the state of the publishing business is such that no one will buy a book from an unknown author. Rory didn't want to accept this, but that was the reality. From all the other publishers where Rory had sent his manuscript, he received rejections. Dora was the only one who still believed in him. However, for Rory it was a faint consolation, and he threw his novel in the trash. Sometime later, Rory found someone's lost manuscript in that old briefcase he bought at the antique store and read it immediately. Every line was filled with such strong emotions that it involuntarily resonated in Rory's heart. Since then, Rory couldn't stop thinking about that manuscript. All the words in it were the embodiment of what he had always aspired to and could never achieve. Where did this manuscript come from, and who wrote it? Of course, Dora noticed something was wrong with her husband. Unable to hold back, he expressed everything that had been accumulating inside him for a long time. Rory doesn't understand why everyone around him, including the father, is in their place, while his life is falling apart. Most of all, Rory is terrified that he will never become who he should be. Dora feels powerless to help her husband, but Rory is grateful to her for being there, despite everything. The manuscript Rory found in the old briefcase tells of a love between an American soldier and a French woman in the post-war period. This story is full of tragedy and pain. Rory can't sleep at night, thinking about it over and over again. He came to the decision to transfer this manuscript into print. Rory didn't know why he was doing it. He just wanted to feel the words pass through his fingers and soul. Rory retyped every word exactly, without moving a dot or a comma, and even without correcting spelling mistakes. Whoever wrote this book was a genius. At night, hearing her husband typing, Dora was happy, thinking that inspiration had returned to him. One day Dora couldn't resist and read the book when Rory's laptop was open. Dora couldn't contain her emotions, such was the power of the work. Rory tried to tell his wife that he wasn't the author of the book, but Dora didn't hear him, saying he had become who he always wanted to be. Only a great writer could have written such a book. Rory never found the strength to admit that the book was written by someone else. The wife advised him to immediately take the novel to the publisher. Despite his doubts, Rory asked Joseph Cutler, the director of the publishing house, to read his novel and give his opinion. Days passed, weeks turned into months, and by the time autumn arrived, Rory had completely forgotten about the book. But one day Mr. Cutler asked Rory to come to the office and said that his book was a masterpiece, and Mr. Cutler intended to publish the novel. Despite the pangs of conscience, Rory signed the contract. The book was a resounding success with critics and readers alike, garnering the highest ratings. Rory Jansen received the fame and recognition he had always dreamed of. The father was very proud of him. But one day Rory met the old man. This is the end of the first chapter. The audience applauded Clay Hammond, and afterwards, he was signing autographs. Daniela approached him, offering wine. Intrigued, Clay offered to talk privately. It seemed the girl was a longtime fan and knew a lot about him. Despite the wedding ring on his finger, Clay responded to her flirtation and asked how she managed to get backstage. The girl replied that she was a graduate student at Columbia University, which had provided her ticket. Their conversation was interrupted because Clay had to read the second and final chapter of the evening. The old man followed Rory. When Rory stopped on a bench in the park to read a book, the old man sat next to him and started an easy conversation. At first, the old man talked about how much he admired Rory's book. Reading it, the old man felt as though he was in post-war Paris and could taste that sweet wine, love that girl. Rory was grateful and left an autograph on the old man's copy, who said he also had a story that would surely appeal to such a great writer as Rory. However, on the pretext that his wife was waiting for him, he was about to leave, when suddenly the old man said that the story was about a man who lost his manuscript and the scoundrel who found it. These words made Rory stop and sit back down on the bench. The old man began his story, which started in 1944. An 18-year-old soldier of the active army was not fighting but was sent to Paris at the very end of the war. The soldiers of that unit were tasked with repairing sewer pipes destroyed by Nazi occupiers. Of course, the young soldiers were not thrilled with this assignment, but it was better than being on the front line. For the soldiers, days passed in routine work related to the restoration of the city. The main character befriended one of the guys who constantly read books and was very smart. Over time, they became best friends. Following the friend's example, the young man also began to read and for the first time realized that the world was much bigger than he could imagine. The young man wanted to become a writer, but he had no idea how to handle words. One day, as the young man and his friend were having a snack at an open-air cafe, the character saw a French waitress and fell in love at first sight. Despite the language barrier, the young man and the girl understood each other without words. It was a perfect relationship. The young man began to learn French, and the girl began to learn English. They did not want to part for a moment. However, their brief happiness soon came to an end because the young man was demobilized. He confessed his love to her and promised that he would return for her. The girl was ready to run after the train, watching as the beloved left her. The young man returned to his former peaceful life, but now none of it made sense to him. For the first time in his life, he tried to write, thinking of Paris and his beloved. But the words did not form into sentences. When the young man returned to Paris, the girl, seeing him, immediately ran into his arms. Since then, The young man began to learn the craft of writing and got a job as a journalist in a small English-language newspaper. Love inspired the young man to become better. 2 weeks later, he married Celia. Soon they had a child. It was a happy time, but the young man did not know it at the time. Maybe no one ever knows it in advance. The little daughter cried so much that her father could not write, nor even think. Saying this, the old man was very thoughtful and suddenly said that his daughter was unwell. It was a hopeless situation. The doctor could not help. Celia cried and was hysterical, while the husband hugged her, trying to calm down. The spouses lost their daughter. Celia was never the same again, nor was her husband, although he tried to pretend that nothing had happened. Celia refused to eat and did not talk, despite the husband's attempts to reach out to her. For the young man, staying at home became unbearable, so he left and returned drunk late at night, seeing a letter from Celia on the table. She wrote that she was going to her mother's in the village. Celia needed time to think about everything. This broke the young man's heart. In a burst of emotion, he began to throw everything he could lay his hands on, and then cried. Without Celia, he felt an emptiness inside himself. On the other hand, the heartache opened up what he had long tried to discover. The young man began to write, and this time the words formed into sentences just right. He wrote night after night, pouring on paper everything that had accumulated on his soul after the loss of the daughter. The young man forgot to sleep and eat, unable to control this flow of words. 2 weeks later, the novella was finished. Listening to this, Rory couldn't contain his admiration. He was eager to know the continuation of this story. The old man said that after he finished the novel, he immediately found his wife. She was heartbroken and begged him to return to Paris without her. He had no choice but to leave. Reading the husband's novella, Celia couldn't hold back her tears. A few weeks later, she finally returned home. The young man thanked God that the wife was with him again. Celia said she wanted to start life anew. It was only later that Celia realized she had left the briefcase containing her husband's book on the train. The young man was very upset, although years later he would blame himself for giving it so much importance. There was a disagreement between the spouses. The young man tried to find that briefcase on the arriving train but never did. For a while, the spouses tried to make everything right, but the past cannot be erased, no matter how much one might wish it. Soon the young man began to yearn for home, and this longing overtook him so much that he returned to America and did not go back to Paris. He never saw Celia again. After losing those pages, the young man could not find the right words and eventually gave up trying to write a new book. Some time later, he moved to a small town in the north and seemed to find peace, but that was not the end of the story. When everything had passed and the young man had become an old man, one day he wandered into a bookstore where a book by a young talented writer was being promoted. The old man opened the book and recognized his own story. Rory had nothing to say in his defense. He was not a bad person, it was just how circumstances unfolded. The old man was not here to argue. He just wanted Rory to understand what really lay behind the story he had appropriated for himself. Perhaps now Rory will write the next book? Rory remained sitting on the bench, oblivious to anyone and anything around him. This is the end of the second chapter. The audience once again loudly applauded Clay Hammond. He briefly interacted with fans and then approached Daniela. When she offered to leave together, he accepted without hesitation. Daniela was surprised that the famous writer's apartment was rather empty. This is where he creates his masterpieces. Clay clearly wanted to continue the evening in the company of the charming girl and went to get wine, and when he returned, Daniela asked him to tell her how the story of Rory and the old man ended. Clay could not refuse the beauty and recounted how Rory Jansen, after sitting on the bench for many hours, was about to get drunk but then regained his composure. Rory knew that only the truth could set him free. Dora is happy, looking forward to moving with her husband to a big house. But suddenly Rory told her that he was a liar. In reality, he did not write that book but stole it, not even knowing from whom. There was not a single word of his in that book. Dora could not immediately grasp this. She had believed the husband, and it turns out he had been lying to her all this time. Now Dora could not stay in the apartment with her husband. The next person Rory told the truth was Joseph Cutler. They found themselves in an extremely difficult position. Rory's books, which had not been successful before, were also published and received high ratings, all thanks to the novella Tears on the Window. Rory asks for his name to be taken off the cover, but the publisher thinks it's a bad idea because then the media and television would destroy them. Therefore, according to Cutler, the only right solution is to share the book's advance with the old man, as well as pay him additional compensation. When Rory asked Cutler whether the books he wrote himself were any good, the publisher had nothing to say. Dora doesn't want a single foolish mistake to destroy their marriage and life. However, guilt prevents Rory from moving forward. He is on the verge of breaking down. Dora hugged her husband, saying she won't let this break him. Together they will get through it. Rory found the old man, who is currently into flower breeding. The old man told Rory not to worry and to go back to his beautiful life. The old man had no intentions of exposing him, but Rory was not there for that. He was there to make things right. He wants to give the money he received for the book to the old man and tell the whole world the truth. But the old man isn't concerned about the money. It's the stolen life and the joy and pain that bred every word in the book. Rory stole someone else's life, and no amount of money can change that. Rory repeated that he wants to make everything right, but the old man tried to drive him away, saying what's done cannot be undone. Rory didn't leave, and then the old man confessed that many years ago, he saw Celia once again in New Jersey when he was on his way to work by train. Celia had remarried and had a child. At some point, she too saw her first love. They looked at each other, knowing that now their paths would forever part. All those years, he thought of her every day, thinking he had broken her life. But Celia, it seems, found her happiness, unlike him. The truth is, the old man ruined his life not because he lost his masterpiece. His tragedy was that he loved words more than his wife. Now the old man has only one request for Rory: to leave forever and never look back. Each of us has the right to choose, but the hardest part is living with that choice. Before leaving, Rory told the old man that his book was amazing. After that, he returned to his life, having reconciled with his choice. Clay told his listener that a month later, Rory went to visit the old man again, but he had already passed away, taking their secret with him forever. Visiting the man's grave, Rory placed the original manuscript on it. This was the end of a story with neither a moral nor a deserved punishment for the character. There is only the belief that a person can maintain their conscience, regardless of anything. Daniela realized that this novel was autobiographical, and it was actually Clay's own story. Hearing the whole truth, Daniela had conflicting feelings, but she was also overcome with passion. However, Clay asked her to leave. All these years, he had been trying to earn his wife's forgiveness, who served as the prototype